The business-class cabin of Flight 814 shimmered in golden light as crystal glasses clinked and the scent of expensive perfume filled the air. Every seat looked like a small kingdom of luxury until one man disrupted the perfect symmetry. Daniel Reed, tall and broad-shouldered, struggled to fit a pink unicorn backpack into the overhead bin while balancing a child's car seat. His worn jacket brushed against tailored suits and designer handbags. A few passengers sighed, others smirked, but none more visibly than Clara Weston. Clara, 34. The icy face of Weston Tech leaned back in her leather seat and watched with mild disgust. To her, the man's presence was an error in an otherwise flawless equation. His jeans were ordinary, his shoes unbranded, his hands rough hands that worked, not signed contracts. She stirred her champagne and whispered to the woman beside her. Business class should have standards. Daniel pretended not to hear. His focus was on the little girl tugging at his sleeve. Ella, 7, with curls like morning sunlight, pressed her nose to the window, fascinated by the glowing runway below. "Daddy, do the planes sleep when people do?" she asked. He smiled softly. "No, sweetheart. Planes dream too, just like you." The woman across the aisle chuckled under her breath. Clara didn't. She rolled her eyes, silently labeling him a struggling single father pretending to belong. But behind Daniel's calm blue eyes lived something no one in that cabin could see: a history of flight suits, medals, and combat skies. And while the passengers judged his clothes, fate was already preparing a storm that would strip every label away. Tonight, Flight 814 would test not money, not titles, but courage. Clara Weston had built her empire on precision and perception. To her, people were numbers, assets, and potential liabilities. She believed the world was divided between those who succeeded and those who existed. Sitting in her seat, legs crossed, champagne in hand, she glanced again at Daniel and his daughter. The sight bothered her, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was how calm he looked, like a man who didn't care about anyone's opinion. She opened her laptop, a glowing reflection on her perfect makeup, and typed furiously, pretending not to listen to the quiet giggle from the next row. Ella was sketching airplanes on a small notebook, her little fingers moving with confidence. Daniel watched her with soft eyes, the kind that spoke of patience born from pain. When the flight attendant offered drinks, Clara spoke loudly enough for the rows around to hear. "Some people," she said with an icy smile, "should think twice before buying a business-class ticket." The hedge fund manager beside her smirked, enjoying the cruelty. Daniel's hand paused for just a second. Tightening around the cup of apple juice he held for Ella, his eyes flickered toward Clara, not in anger, but in quiet understanding. As if he had seen far worse than arrogance at 30,000 feet, he set the drink down carefully, then helped Ella unfold her blanket. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines, "why are people laughing at us?" Daniel looked at her, his expression calm and steady. "Because, sweetheart, some people haven't learned how to be quiet when they don't understand." Ella nodded, satisfied with the answer. She leaned against his arm, content, while Clara shifted in her seat, strangely unsettled by the simplicity of his words. Outside the window, the sky darkened. The last trace of daylight melted into the Atlantic horizon, and the hum of the jet engines deepened into a steady rhythm. Inside the cabin, the contrast between worlds had never felt sharper: leather and luxury on one side, love and humility on the other. Clara tried to return to her work, but found herself glancing back at them again. She noticed the way Daniel brushed a loose curl from Ella's forehead, the way he smiled when she pointed at the wing lights blinking in the night. There was something uncomfortably human about it, something she couldn't analyze or categorize. For the first time, Clara Weston, queen of logic, master of control, felt an emotion she didn't recognize. Not pity, not curiosity, something closer to envy. She took another sip of champagne, trying to wash away the thought, unaware that before the night was over, the balance of power in this cabin would change forever. Soon, the sky would shake, and when it did, Clara Weston would discover that the man she mocked might be the only reason she would live to see another sunrise. The laughter from earlier had faded into quiet conversation. The hum of engines steady and reassuring. Business class had settled into its rhythm. Laptops glowing, champagne glasses refilled, and the faint sound of Ella humming as she colored another airplane in her sketchbook. Clara glanced once more at Daniel, annoyed at how peaceful he looked. He didn't belong in her world, yet somehow his calm presence filled the cabin more than the luxury surrounding them. Then, without warning, the world shifted. A deep shudder tore through the fuselage. The crystal glasses rattled violently. A low metallic groan echoed from beneath the cabin floor as if the plane itself were crying out in pain. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Ella's crayon rolled off her tray table. Clara's glass tipped, spilling champagne onto her laptop. The hum of comfort turned into the roar of chaos. "What's happening? Daddy?" Ella's voice trembled. Daniel's instincts flared awake like a switch he had buried years ago. He looked up, scanning the lights, the vibrations, the sound of engines struggling to keep rhythm. His voice dropped to that calm, measured tone that had once guided younger pilots through training. "Hold tight, sweetheart. It's just turbulence." But deep down, he knew this was no ordinary turbulence. In the cockpit, Captain Henry Cooper gripped the controls as alarms lit up across the dashboard. Red and amber lights blinked in rapid succession. The plane jolted again, losing altitude for a terrifying instant before stabilizing. "Hydraulic pressure drop," Henry muttered, scanning the gauges. "Number 2 engine showing fluctuations." Beside him, First Officer Mark Lewis pressed a hand to his stomach, sweat breaking across his forehead. "I don't feel right," he whispered. His voice cracked. He tried to focus on the instrument panel, but the lines blurred. "Mark?" Henry turned, alarmed. The next second, Mark's body went rigid, then slumped forward against the controls. The plane pitched sharply to the right. Warning sirens screamed through the cockpit. "Mayday! No, not yet!" Henry hissed, grabbing the yoke with both hands, fighting to level the aircraft. He reached for the intercom with one hand while the other kept the jet from rolling. "Sophie, cockpit, now!" In business class, passengers gasped as the plane dipped again. Clara's knuckles turned white as she clutched the armrest. Her expensive composure shattered in an instant. Ella clung to Daniel's sleeve, eyes wide. Moments later, the forward curtain tore open and Sophie Lane, the lead flight attendant, appeared. Face pale but controlled, she squeezed through the narrow door and froze at the sight. Mark unconscious. The captain fighting the controls alone. Warning lights flashing like fireflies of doom. Henry's voice was taut. "He's out cold. Possible medical emergency. Get help and prepare the cabin. We might have to divert." Sophie nodded, heart racing, and rushed out, closing the cockpit door behind her. Inside the cabin, the air felt heavier, charged with silent dread. Passengers whispered prayers while Daniel's eyes sharpened, every sound feeding an instinct long suppressed. He didn't know it yet, but the sky had just called him back. The plane trembled again, harder this time. Overhead bins rattled, the lights flickered, and frightened murmurs swept through the cabin. Champagne bottles rolled down the aisles, followed by someone's whispered prayer. The smell of burning insulation filled the air, sharp and terrifying. Then, a voice crackled through the intercom, calm yet carrying an edge that made every heartbeat stop. "This is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a technical emergency. If there is anyone on board with flight experience, military or civilian, please identify yourself immediately." The sound hung in the air like a verdict. For a moment, no one moved. Dozens of faces turned toward one another, searching for reassurance that never came. The laughter, the arrogance, the invisible walls of status, all gone. The cabin was now united by fear. Clara gripped the armrest so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as the realization hit. This might be the end. She glanced at Daniel, who sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the seat in front of him. His expression wasn't fear. It was calculation, memory. Inside his chest, two promises clashed like opposing storms. He had sworn to Sarah, his late wife, that he would never risk his life again. She had made him promise it with her last breath. He would raise their daughter, be present, live quietly, never again chase the sky, never again tempt fate. But now, as the aircraft tilted to the side and the oxygen masks rattled above their heads, Ella's hand gripped his. Her small fingers trembled. "Daddy, are we going to fall?" Daniel turned to her. In her wide, terrified eyes, he saw every reason he ever needed. The world shrank to that single moment. His fear, his grief, his vows all dissolved into clarity. He smiled gently, the kind of smile that hides courage behind calm. "No, sweetheart, not while I'm here." Then he stood. Dozens of eyes followed him as he rose from his seat, the movement slow and deliberate amid the chaos. Sophie Lane, the lead flight attendant, appeared at his side almost instantly, her face pale and desperate. "Sir, please stay seated. The captain is—" Daniel cut her off with quiet authority. "I heard him." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and handed her an old identification card. The edges were frayed, the lamination faded, but the emblem of an eagle still gleamed under the flickering light. "Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Reed, fighter pilot, United States Air Force." Sophie's eyes widened as she read it. She looked up at him, searching his face for confirmation, and found it in the steady calm of his eyes. Behind him, Ella whispered proudly, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "That's my daddy. He can fly anything." The cabin fell silent. Even Clara's breath caught as Daniel followed Sophie toward the cockpit, his stride confident, unhurried, the way only a man who had faced death before could walk. Somewhere ahead, the captain waited. Somewhere outside, the storm roared, and for the first time that night, hope had a face. The cockpit smelled of heat and metal. Warning lights flashed in frantic rhythm, casting red and amber shadows across the faces of two men fighting gravity. Captain Henry Cooper's hands were locked on the controls, his jaw tight with focus. The aircraft trembled again, the frame groaning under pressure. When the door opened, Henry turned sharply, ready to bark an order, but stopped. The man stepping inside carried a presence that didn't need introduction. "Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Reed," Daniel said, voice calm yet commanding. "Air Force, 2,000 combat hours." Henry's eyes flickered with relief. "Glad you're here. First officer's down. We've lost partial hydraulics, number 2 engines overheating, and the nav system's giving nonsense readings. Can you handle comms and system checks?" Daniel slid into the jump seat without hesitation. His hands moved with practiced precision, flipping switches, scanning gauges, adjusting trim. The years away from the cockpit melted in seconds. He spoke with that quiet authority only experience could grant. "Roger that. I'll take systems and radios. Let's get this bird home." Outside, lightning exploded across the sky, illuminating sheets of rain slashing against the windshield. Visibility dropped to nothing but a gray wall. The plane shuddered under another burst of turbulence. The sound was deafening, a mixture of wind, thunder, and the deep mechanical strain of a machine pushed to its limits. In the cabin, passengers prayed, cried, and clung to strangers. But in the cockpit, there was only control and discipline. 2 pilots, 1 fight, engine 2 temperature rising, Daniel reported, scanning the instruments. Hydraulic pressure fluctuating between 40 and 60%. We need to plan descent before we lose it completely. Henry nodded, sweat beading along his temple. "Nearest airport? Shannon, Ireland," Daniel replied, already contacting air traffic control. "Flight 814 declaring emergency. We have 200 souls on board. 1 incapacitated crew. Partial system failure. Requesting immediate vectors for emergency landing." Static filled the headset, then a distant Irish voice responded, calm but alert. "Flight 814, Shannon Tower. You are cleared for priority approach. Weather's rough, visibility near 0, but we'll guide you all the way." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Copy that. Shannon, we're coming your way." Another flash of lightning lit the cockpit, revealing the strain on Henry's face. Daniel glanced at him. "I'll monitor temps and flaps. You focus on flying." Trust your instincts. Captain. Henry gave a short nod. You sound like a man who's done this before. Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile. Too many times. Outside, the Atlantic raged. Inside, the two men fought back the storm with courage and skill, steering the massive jet through air that no longer obeyed. Each second stretched into eternity. In row 6, a little girl held her unicorn backpack and whispered, "Daddy's flying again." She was right. Daniel Reed had returned to the sky, and fate was watching closely to see if his hands could still save lives. The rain was no longer falling. It was attacking. Thick sheets of water hammered the windshield, turning the world into a blur of gray motion. Lightning ripped across the clouds, illuminating the runway below for only a heartbeat before swallowing it again. Inside the cockpit, Daniel's voice cut through the chaos like a compass. Flap set, airspeed 150, altitude 3,000 and dropping. Captain Henry Cooper nodded, his hands steady on the yoke. Crosswinds picking up from the right, 30 knots and climbing. Daniel's eyes darted between instruments, his tone measured and calm. Adjust 10 degrees left. Maintain heading. 090. We'll line up on the second attempt. The plane shook violently as a gust hit its side. Luggage slammed in overhead bins, and the passengers screamed. Clara gripped her armrest until her nails dug into the leather. Ella pressed her forehead against the window, watching the flashes of light streak through the storm. "Daddy's flying, isn't he?" she whispered to no one in particular. A man beside her nodded, trembling. "Yes, sweetheart. He's the reason we're still in the sky." Inside the cockpit, Henry's breathing grew heavier. The runway lights appeared for a second through the mist. "Runway in sight," he said. "Too fast." Daniel replied immediately. "Speed 165. Abort. Go around." Henry increased thrust, pulling the jet back into the clouds. The engines roared, pressing every passenger back into their seats. Panic filled the cabin. Someone cried out a prayer. Others clung to strangers as if holding on to life itself. But in the cockpit, two men worked in perfect harmony. Daniel's voice stayed calm, precise. "Flaps to 15, gear up, re-enter pattern for approach, 240. Crosswind correction confirmed. Let's try it again." Henry's knuckles were white, but his voice was firm. "Roger that." The second descent began. Every second felt stretched. Every gust of wind another test of endurance. Daniel read the numbers aloud, his tone steady like a heartbeat. Altitude 2,000, speed 155, crosswind 25, holding centerline, perfect. The lights of the runway grew clearer. Henry guided the jet with surgical precision while Daniel called out corrections. 1,000 feet, stable approach, you're good. 500, maintain course. 200, flare, now. The tires hit the runway with a jolt. The aircraft bounced once, then settled. Wheels screaming against the wet asphalt. Reverse thrust roared. Steam rose from the brakes. Then, silence. For a heartbeat. No one moved. Then came the sound of sobbing, laughter, and disbelief. 200 lives exhaled at once. In the cockpit, Henry leaned back, drenched in sweat. He turned to Daniel, extending his hand with trembling respect. "You just saved 200 souls. Colonel, the Air Force lost a hell of a pilot when you retired." Daniel removed the headset, his breath slow and steady. "Just doing what needed to be done. Captain." Outside, rain continued to pour over the tarmac, but inside that plane, the storm had already passed. And yet, somewhere behind them, a woman in a crimson dress sat silently, tears mixing with the rain streaking down her window. For the first time, Clara Weston was not thinking about herself. She was thinking about the man she had misjudged and the courage she could never buy. The heavy doors opened with a hiss, and the cold Irish rain swept inside. The storm had finally eased, leaving the runway bathed in silver reflections. Emergency lights flickered against the mist as paramedics hurried past, but for most passengers, the nightmare was over. Daniel stepped out of the cockpit, carrying Ella in his arms. Her little head rested against his shoulder, her eyes still wide but calm. The moment they appeared, the cabin erupted in applause. Some people clapped through tears, others whispered prayers of gratitude. Every sound, every face, carried the same message. We are alive because of him. Daniel gave a modest nod, almost embarrassed by the attention. His boots splashed softly against the wet tarmac as he descended the stairs. Behind him, Captain Henry Cooper followed, exhausted but proud. For a brief moment, the two men exchanged a silent acknowledgement that only those who had fought death together could understand. Inside the cabin, Clara Weston remained frozen in her seat. Her hands trembled as she tried to process what she had witnessed. The man she had dismissed as unworthy, the man she had mocked, had just saved her life. The realization hollowed something inside her, something she had spent years pretending didn't exist. She stood, her heels clicking unevenly on the metal floor, and followed him outside. The wind caught her hair, ruining the perfect style she had built like armor. She didn't care. "Daniel," she called softly. He turned, Ella still asleep in his arms. For a moment, the rain between them felt like a curtain separating two worlds. Her voice shook. "I owe you my life. I was wrong about you." Daniel's gaze was calm, steady, almost kind. "No one owes me anything," he said. "I just did what any father would do." The simplicity of his words hit harder than any accusation could have. Clara looked at him, searching for something to say, but nothing came. The woman who had conquered boardrooms and silenced competitors stood speechless before a man who had nothing yet seemed to possess everything. Behind them, cameras flashed as news crews began arriving, the story already spreading like wildfire. But Daniel didn't notice. He shifted Ella in his arms and turned away from the noise, walking toward the terminal lights in the distance. Clara watched him go, her chest tightening with something unfamiliar. It wasn't attraction or admiration, it was the painful recognition of how small her victories suddenly felt. For years, she had built walls out of money and pride, believing success could shield her from emptiness. Yet in this drenched, trembling moment, she realized how wrong she had been. The storm had ended in the sky, but inside Clara Weston, it was just beginning. And somewhere deep within her, a quiet voice whispered that perhaps it was time to start over. The airport terminal buzzed with reporters and flashing lights, but Daniel kept walking, his daughter safe in his arms. He wanted no headlines, no applause, only quiet. At the exit, a small voice broke the noise. "Miss Clara?" Ella stood on the wet pavement, clutching her unicorn backpack, her curls stuck to her cheeks, her eyes bright despite the storm. Clara turned, startled. "Yes, sweetheart." Ella smiled shyly. "Would you like to have dinner with us? My daddy makes really good spaghetti. Mommy used to say our table always has room for one more friend." Clara froze. The simplicity of the invitation pierced through the noise of her world. For years, she had dined in Michelin-starred restaurants, surrounded by crystal and silence, yet no invitation had ever felt as genuine as this one. She glanced at Daniel, who stood beside a taxi, looking equally surprised. "Ella, maybe Miss Clara has plans," he began softly. Clara interrupted, her voice trembling with something new. "No, I'd love to join you." The small diner near the airport was nothing like the restaurants she was used to. The lights buzzed faintly, the tables were scratched from years of use, and the menu was laminated. Yet as they sat in a corner booth, the warmth felt disarmingly real. Daniel cooked quickly in the open kitchen, moving with quiet efficiency. The smell of tomato sauce filled the air. Ella sat beside Clara, explaining the aerodynamics of spaghetti with the seriousness of a young scientist. Using a fork to demonstrate how noodle wings could lift, Clara laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in years. When Daniel joined them, his eyes softened at the sight. "It's been a long time since this table had 3 plates," he said quietly. They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Eventually, Clara asked, "Your wife, she must have been extraordinary." Daniel's smile turned tender, touched with memory. "Laura was sunshine. She believed success wasn't about having more, but about meaning more to someone. She taught me that life's worth isn't measured by money or titles, but by the love you leave behind." The words settled over the table like a blessing. Clara didn't speak. For the first time, silence felt comfortable. She watched Daniel help Ella cut her food, his every movement gentle, deliberate. She noticed the way his eyes brightened when Ella giggled. Something inside her chest shifted. An ache, a longing, or maybe something beginning to heal. Outside, the rain had stopped. The reflection of the neon sign painted soft colors across their faces. Clara realized that, for the first time in her adult life, she didn't want the evening to end. She didn't know it yet. But this quiet dinner in a worn-down diner would mark the moment everything she believed about success, love, and happiness began to change. When Clara Weston returned to her office in New York, the skyline looked different. The same glass towers that once made her feel powerful now seemed cold, like trophies of a life that had lost its meaning. She stood by the window of her top-floor corner office, watching planes take off from the distant airport. Every time one disappeared into the clouds, she thought of Daniel and Ella, of courage, love, and the quiet strength that had saved them all. The next morning, she called a company-wide meeting. Her employees expected another quarterly review, another speech about growth and revenue. Instead, Clara spoke softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "From today," she said, "our company will measure success not by how much we earn, but by how much we give back." The room fell silent. She continued, explaining her decision to establish a foundation supporting single parents, children who had lost their families, and those who carried the quiet burdens that no balance sheet could show. She promised paid parental leave, mental health programs, and volunteer opportunities. It was the first time her board had seen her speak from the heart rather than a presentation slide. Weeks passed. The culture of Weston Technologies began to shift. Employees smiled more, meetings opened with gratitude instead of competition, and Clara herself changed in small, quiet ways. She started taking the subway instead of the company car. She flew economy on business trips, sitting beside everyday people, listening to their stories. Each flight reminded her of that day, the day when judgment turned to humility, and fear turned to faith. On her desk, a single framed photo replaced the awards that once lined her wall. It showed Daniel Reed carrying little Ella through the rain, the moment after the landing. To others, it was just an image. To Clara, it was her compass, a reminder of what real strength looked like. One spring afternoon, an envelope arrived, handwritten, sealed with pink glitter stickers. She recognized the handwriting instantly. "Dear Miss Clara," it began, "Daddy says people change when they find their hearts again. I think you found yours. Please come to my school play. I'm playing the little airplane that learns to fly with love." Clara pressed the letter to her chest, tears blurring the ink. That evening, she cleared her schedule and booked the earliest flight. In the school auditorium, Clara sat quietly in the back row, surrounded by parents eager to film the show. When little Ella stepped onto the stage, her silver paper wings catching the light, the room fell silent. Then, with a clear, confident voice, Ella said, "To fly high, you don't just need wings, you need a heart that loves." The crowd broke into warm applause. Phones shook with excitement, but Clara didn't clap. She just sat there, her eyes filling with tears she didn't bother to hide. In that innocent sentence, she heard something deeper than any adult could teach, the wisdom born of pure love. For years, Clara had chased success, approval, and control, believing that freedom came from achievement. Yet it took a child, her child, to remind her that real flight begins when the heart is light enough to let go. As laughter and music filled the room, Clara finally smiled. For the first time in her life, she understood that soaring had nothing to do with wings. It had everything to do with love.